They didn't just take money from me over time. They took something much deeper, something I can't ever fully get back. It wasn't a sudden loss, not something loud or dramatic. It was slow, quiet, almost invisible until the damage was already done. By the time I realized what had happened, it was too late. Every dollar I had saved for over a decade was gone. And the worst part wasn't even the money itself. It was the moment my grandson looked at me, confused and hurt. He was standing in that financial office, holding papers in his trembling hands, and all he could say was that there were only 27 cents left. 27 cents where a future was supposed to be waiting. I remember laughing at first, but not because it was funny. It was the kind of laugh people give when reality feels impossible. I told him he must be looking at the wrong account. I told him to check again, slowly this time, carefully. But he didn't laugh back, and that silence said everything. That was the moment something inside me shifted permanently. My name is Vivian Halbrook, and I am 71 years old. I live alone in a small house on Alderwick Lane. It's the kind of place that creaks when winter settles in, and when it rains, the air fills with the scent of cedar wood. It's not a grand home, but it carries a lifetime of memories. My husband Arthur built the shelves in the kitchen himself. They're uneven, slightly crooked, but I never fix them. Because some things aren't meant to be perfect. Some things are meant to be remembered exactly as they were. I didn't start saving money with some grand plan in mind. There was no strategy, no financial blueprint, no big vision. It began with something small, almost forgettable. A simple porcelain jar sitting near my stove. It had a faded blue iris painted along its side. Every time I had a little extra change, I dropped it in. Sometimes coins, sometimes a few folded bills from groceries. Other times it came from baking for neighbors down the street, sweet apple pastries that smelled like cinnamon and quiet evenings. That jar became my habit before it became my purpose. Back then, my grandson Miles was only 10 years old. He was thin, quiet, always thinking more than he spoke. He used to sit at my kitchen table for hours, just watching me cook like it meant something important. One day, he asked me what I was saving for. I told him I was saving for his future. He didn't smile, didn't joke, didn't brush it off. He simply nodded like he understood more than he should. That's who he was, even as a child. Over time, that jar turned into something bigger, something official, something structured, something organized. My son Brennan convinced me to open an account. He said it would grow faster, safer, smarter that way. He handled all the paperwork, all the technical details. He talked about interest rates and long-term benefits, words that sounded important but never felt trustworthy to me. Still, I let him take control because he was family, because I believed him when he said he would take care of it. His wife Sloane always spoke with that careful tone, the kind that sounds polite until you listen closely. She would smile and say it was sweet what I was doing, but there was always distance behind her words, like she was observing, not truly understanding. She often mentioned how expensive college had become, how difficult it would be to keep up with costs, and sometimes she asked if I was stretching myself too much. The truth is, I was stretching myself every single month. There were times I chose cheaper groceries just to save more, Times I delayed fixing things that needed urgent attention, even when the roof began to leak during heavy rains. I placed buckets in the hallway to catch the water, listening to each drop like a warning I ignored. I even sold Arthur's old watch without telling anyone, a piece of history I once promised I would keep forever. Every dollar I saved had a story attached to it, and I wrote each one down in a notebook, carefully, neatly, like it mattered, because it did. Years passed, and the account grew slowly but surely. One day, it crossed $100,000. I didn't celebrate, didn't call anyone, didn't make noise. I just sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching sunlight move quietly across the wooden floor. Because for me, it wasn't about pride. It was about knowing I had done what needed to be done. Miles never asked for any of it, not once. He wasn't that kind of child, never demanding, never entitled. So when he got accepted into Westbridge University, he didn't come to me excited. He came to me unsure, like he was asking permission to dream bigger than he should. And I told him something I believed completely at the time. I told him he could afford it. I told him everything was ready. I told him his future was already waiting for him. I just didn't know that future had already been taken away. The moment I told him everything was ready, I believed it completely. There was no hesitation in my voice, no doubt in my mind. Because for 11 years I had built that certainty piece by piece. But certainty can disappear faster than it's built. It started with something small that didn't feel important at first, a missed phone call that should have meant nothing at all. I tried calling Brennan that evening, just casually at first, the way a mother checks in without needing a reason. He didn't answer, which wasn't unusual for him. He always said he was busy, always had something going on. So I waited a little while and tried again. Still nothing. By the third call, something didn't feel quite right anymore. Not fear exactly, but something quieter than that, like a feeling settling into your chest without asking permission. When he finally answered later that night, his voice felt different. Not warm, not relaxed, not even annoyed, just tight, controlled in a way that didn't match the moment. Before I could say anything meaningful, he cut me off gently. He said everything was under control and I shouldn't worry. The strange part was, I hadn't even asked about the account. That was the first crack, small but impossible to ignore. That night I stood alone in my kitchen for a long time, a pot of lentil stew simmering quietly in front of me. I wasn't hungry, but I kept stirring it anyway, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking felt dangerous. There are moments in life where something shifts without warning, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to change everything. This was one of those moments. 2 days later, the truth arrived without any softness. Miles called me in the middle of the day. His voice was calm, but it didn't sound like him. It sounded like someone trying very hard not to break. He told me he was at the financial office. He told me they had pulled up the account. And then he said the number, 27 cents. For a second, I genuinely thought I misunderstood him. I even smiled a little, the way people do in disbelief. I told him he must be looking at the wrong account. I told him to check again to make sure everything was correct. But he didn't correct me, and he didn't hesitate. He simply repeated it slower this time. The balance was 27 cents. That number didn't just sound wrong, it felt insulting, like something sacred had been reduced to nothing. I told him not to sign anything at the office. I told him to stay exactly where he was, and then I hung up before my voice could change. My hands were already moving before I realized it. I grabbed my old leather notebook from the counter. Every deposit, every sacrifice, every decision was written inside. 11 years of effort sitting quietly between those pages. I flipped through them quickly, not reading, just confirming, because I needed to see proof that it had all been real. Then I called Brennan again, straight to voicemail. I called again and again, each time waiting a little longer. Still nothing but silence and an empty response. On the third attempt, it rang longer than usual. For a moment, I thought he might finally answer, but then it cut off again like it always had. A message appeared almost immediately afterward. He said he was in a meeting and would call later. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, not because I expected more, but because I understood something. He already knew. That realization didn't hit loudly, it settled slowly, like a truth that had been waiting for me to catch up. Instead of replying, I called Sloane. She answered quickly, almost too quickly for comfort. Her voice sounded measured, careful, almost prepared. I told her exactly what Miles had said. I didn't soften it, didn't adjust my tone, didn't hesitate. There was a pause on the other end of the line, not long enough to be obvious, but long enough to matter. Then she exhaled softly, like someone dealing with inconvenience. She said these kinds of banking errors happen sometimes. She said accounts can glitch or display incorrect balances, but her words didn't carry any real concern behind them, just explanation without urgency. I told her 11 years don't disappear by accident. That's when her tone shifted slightly. Not emotional, not defensive, just more distant. She started using words that didn't belong in that moment. Words like reallocations and financial adjustments. She spoke about family needs and unexpected expenses. She said Brennan may have used some of the funds. Used, not borrowed, not transferred, just used. That word landed harder than anything else she said, because it revealed exactly how she saw it, like the money was always theirs to take. I reminded her that money was meant for Miles, not for temporary problems, not for convenience. Her response didn't come with apology or hesitation. She said it was all within the family anyway. And then she said something I will never forget. She suggested Miles consider a cheaper option for college, community college, just for a while, she said, like his future was something flexible they could adjust. That was the moment I stopped expecting understanding. I ended the call before she could say anything else. The house felt different after that conversation. Nothing had physically changed, but everything felt altered, like something invisible had broken beneath the surface. I went straight to the cabinet where I kept my papers, carefully organized just the way I had always kept them. Bank statements, tax records, insurance documents. Everything that mattered was supposed to be there. I searched for the education account file. It wasn't in the first folder, or the second. I checked again, slower this time, more carefully. Still nothing. I pulled everything out and laid it on the floor. One by one, I went through each document, looking not just for the file, but for any explanation. But the file wasn't misplaced, it was gone. That realization came quietly, without panic or noise, because deep down I already knew where it had gone. Brennan had taken it months ago. He said it was for updating the account structure. I remembered signing something that day, standing at the kitchen table while he explained it quickly. He told me it was routine, nothing complicated, and I believed him without reading a single word. That memory didn't hurt the way I expected. It didn't hit like a shock or a realization. It spread slowly, like something permanent settling in. Because trust doesn't break loudly, it breaks quietly in moments you don't question enough. My phone rang again, and this time it was Miles. He sounded smaller than before, more uncertain now. He told me they were asking about payment options, installments, deadlines, things he didn't understand yet. I closed my eyes for a second before answering him. I told him to ask for a few more days, just enough time for me to figure things out. He hesitated before agreeing, like he didn't believe it fully. But then he said something that stayed with me. He said I always handled things when they mattered. I told him I would handle this too. But after I hung up the phone, I stood there quietly, surrounded by missing papers and too many unanswered questions. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think clearly. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This had been happening for a long time, and I had trusted the wrong person to protect it. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a moment. My eyes were closed, but my mind refused to rest. Every detail kept replaying in slow, unforgiving clarity. Every word, every call, every silence that now meant something. By morning, the house felt smaller than it ever had, like the walls were holding on to thoughts I couldn't escape. I made tea out of habit, not because I wanted it. The steam rose slowly, but I never took a single sip. It sat there cooling, untouched, just like everything else. Right beside it was that old porcelain jar, the one that started everything without asking for anything. I hadn't used it in years, but I never moved it. Some things deserve to stay where they began. At exactly 9 in the morning, I left the house, not rushed, not panicked, just focused in a way I hadn't felt before. The drive to the bank felt longer than usual, even though it was the same road I had taken for years. I passed the same grocery store with a faded sign, the same post office with the crooked flag outside. Everything looked exactly the same as yesterday. That was the part that made it worse, because nothing outside had changed at all. But inside, everything had shifted beyond repair. When I stepped into the bank, the air felt controlled, clean, quiet, the kind of place where things are supposed to make sense. A receptionist greeted me with a polite, familiar smile. She recognized me immediately, like she always did. I told her I needed to speak with someone about my account. My voice didn't shake, not even slightly. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, so small most people wouldn't notice it at all. But I noticed, and that was enough. She directed me to an office down the hall. Harlan Peake was already standing when I entered. He was the kind of man who chose his words carefully, measured, controlled, never too much, never too little. He asked me to sit down, but I didn't immediately move. I told him my grandson's account had 27 cents in it, and I asked him to explain why. He didn't look surprised. That told me more than anything he could have said. After a moment, he gestured toward the chair again. This time I sat down slowly, deliberately. He turned his monitor slightly so I could see it, not fully, just enough to show columns of numbers, dates, amounts, transactions stretching across the screen, line after line of something I didn't recognize anymore. He said there had been multiple transactions on the account over the past several months. I asked him how many transactions that meant exactly, because numbers matter when something disappears. He didn't give a number, just continued carefully. He said the transfers were authorized under linked access. That phrase didn't belong in my life, but now it did. I asked him whose access it was, even though I already knew the answer. He said Brennan was listed as an authorized user. I felt something inside me go completely still. Not anger, not shock, just stillness. Because once something becomes real, it stops surprising you. I told him I never gave permission for withdrawals. He said I had signed documents granting extended access about 14 months earlier. 14 months. The memory came back slowly but clearly. A Sunday afternoon at my kitchen table, papers spread in front of me like nothing important. Brennan standing beside me, explaining everything quickly, telling me it was just standard paperwork, telling me it would make things easier. I had signed without reading a single line. That moment replayed differently now. Not harmless, not routine, not simple. It was the beginning of everything that followed. I asked Harlan what kind of transfers had been made. He hesitated for a moment before answering. Then he began listing them, one by one. Medical expenses, home repairs, family reimbursements, educational adjustments. Each word sounded reasonable on its own, but together they formed something else entirely. None of it went to my grandson's education. I asked him that directly, and he confirmed it just as directly. No. That single word carried more weight than anything else, because it stripped away every possible excuse. I looked at the screen again, forcing myself to focus. I asked him how much was missing in total. He took a breath before answering. $132,000. Hearing it out loud made it real in a different way. Not just numbers in a notebook anymore. Not just years of effort written in ink. Gone. Completely gone. I asked him when the last transfer had been made. He checked the records again before answering. 3 days ago. That detail hit differently than the total amount, because it meant Brennan knew exactly what he was doing. He knew the tuition deadline was approaching. He knew Miles was preparing for college, and he still took the money anyway. I asked him for copies of everything, every transaction, every document, every record. He said there were limitations because of shared access, but he could provide summaries immediately and request full documentation afterwards. I told him to print everything he could, every single page that existed. The printer started running behind him, page after page sliding out into a neat stack, each sheet carrying a piece of something I had built and someone
I had the right to dispute the transactions if they were unauthorized or obtained improperly. He also mentioned possible legal action. The words sounded distant, almost abstract, because I was still processing something else entirely. I thought about Brennan as a child for a moment, standing outside with scraped knees and hopeful eyes, looking at me like I could fix anything in the world. That version of him didn't exist here anymore. I thanked Harlan and collected the documents. He added one more detail before I left. There had been a change of mailing address about 9 months ago. I asked where the statements had been sent. He checked the system before answering. To Brennan's business address. That meant I never received a single warning, not because of an error, because it was designed that way. I walked out of the bank slowly. The sunlight outside felt too bright for the moment, too ordinary for something that had just been uncovered. I sat in my car for a long time without moving, the papers resting quietly on my lap. Names, dates, amounts, all of it documented, all of it deliberate. My phone buzzed in my hand suddenly. A message from Brennan appeared on the screen. He said we needed to talk immediately. I looked at the message without reacting. Then I looked back at the papers again, and something inside me finally settled. Not confusion, not fear, something clearer than both. I didn't need to understand this anymore. I needed to stop it. That realization didn't feel loud or dramatic. It felt quiet, steady, and completely certain. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, not heading home right away, just driving, letting the road decide for me. Because for the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing.
I didn't go straight home after leaving the bank. Home felt too quiet for what I was carrying now. Instead, I kept driving without choosing a destination, just following the road like it might clear something inside me. The papers sat on the passenger seat beside me, a stack that looked light but felt impossibly heavy. Because paper doesn't weigh much on its own, but truth does when you finally see it clearly. I stopped near a small cafe I hadn't visited in years, the kind of place where nothing quite matches perfectly. Mismatched cups, handwritten notes on the menu board. It wasn't polished, and that made it easier to sit there. I ordered coffee I didn't really want to drink. Then I chose a table by the window and sat down slowly. The noise around me was soft, distant, almost comforting. I spread the documents out carefully across the table, one page at a time, one line at a time. Dates I recognized, dates I didn't, amounts that felt too large to belong to my life. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, 12,000 taken without hesitation. Each number carried its own quiet betrayal. There was one labeled Roof Repair Reimbursement. I stared at that line longer than the others because my roof had leaked for months without repair. I had placed buckets in the hallway to catch rainwater, listening to every drop echo through the house at night. And all that time, money had already been taken in my name for something that never happened. Another entry listed a medical emergency. I hadn't had any emergency that required thousands of dollars. The only time I went to the hospital was last winter, and I paid for that visit myself, quietly, alone, waiting for hours in a cold room nobody remembered. Then I saw something that made everything stop, an entry labeled Educational Adjustment. The number beside it was $9,200. I didn't move for a long time after seeing that because I knew exactly where that money came from. I opened my notebook slowly, carefully, like it mattered. My handwriting filled the pages with steady consistency. Every deposit, every sacrifice, every small decision. And there it was, written clearly 2 years earlier, $9,200. A note beside it said it came from Arthur's watch. I remembered holding that watch for a long time, feeling its weight, its history, its meaning, before deciding it would serve a better purpose. That day had been difficult, but it felt right, because it was for something important, something honest. And now it had been taken and renamed, turned into something else entirely. Not lost, not misplaced, but deliberately used. That was the moment everything inside me changed. Not in a loud or emotional way, not anger, not even sadness anymore. Something quieter than both of those things. Something final. I closed the notebook slowly and placed it beside the papers. My phone buzzed again on the table in front of me. Another message from Brennan appeared on the screen. He said I needed to stop ignoring him immediately. He said I was making things worse than they were. I turned the phone face down without reading it again. Because for 11 years I had been careful. Careful with money, careful with trust, careful with silence. And in less than a year, he had undone all of it. Not just the savings, but the meaning behind them. I finished my coffee without tasting any of it. Then I gathered the papers into a neat stack, precise, ordered, controlled, just the way Arthur would have done it. When I walked back to my car, I didn't hesitate. I knew exactly what I needed to do next. When I got home, the house greeted me the same way, quiet, familiar, unchanged on the surface, but it no longer felt like a place to rest. It felt like a place to prepare. I placed the documents on the kitchen table, then I pulled out a clean sheet of paper and a pen. I started writing everything down again. Dates, amounts, descriptions, patterns. Not because I would forget any of it, but because I needed it to be undeniable, clear enough that no one could twist it. When I finished, I looked at the list in front of me. It didn't look like confusion or misunderstanding. It looked like a pattern, a deliberate one. My phone rang again, and this time I answered it. Brennan's voice came through immediately, sharp, controlled, already defensive. He asked what he thought he was doing. He said the bank had contacted him. He said I was overreacting to something simple. I almost smiled at that word, simple. I repeated it quietly so he could hear it clearly. Then I asked him a single question. When were you going to put it back? There was a pause on the line. Not long, but long enough to matter. Then he said soon, like it was an acceptable answer. He talked about financial pressure, unexpected problems. He said families help each other when things get difficult. I listened without interrupting him once, because I wanted to hear how far he would go. Then he said something that changed everything again. He told me I was turning this into something bigger than it was, that I didn't understand how money worked at that level, that I needed to be careful about what I was implying. That word stayed with me. Careful. I had been careful for 11 years. Careful didn't protect anything. I told him I wasn't implying anything at all. I told him I was simply understanding it. There was silence after that. Then his tone changed completely. It became colder, sharper, almost threatening. He warned me about making accusations without proof. He said things like that could backfire. That was the moment I understood something clearly. He wasn't sorry. He was concerned about being caught. I told him I would be careful, and then I ended the call. The kitchen felt quieter than before, the kind of quiet that doesn't comfort you, but steadies you. I walked over to a cabinet I rarely opened. Behind a stack of old cookbooks sat a small metal box. I took it out slowly and placed it on the table. Inside was cash I had saved quietly over the years, money I never told anyone about. Not enough to replace everything that was taken, but enough to do something important. I counted it carefully, one bill at a time. Then I added what I could from my checking account. It wasn't comfortable and it wasn't easy, but it was enough to cover Miles's first semester. That mattered more than anything else. I picked up my phone and called him. He answered immediately, like he had been waiting. I told him his tuition would be paid this week. There was silence on the other end of the line. Not confusion, not disbelief, something heavier. He said I didn't have to do that. He said I had already done enough for him. I told him that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what happened next. He said he thought the money was safe. I told him I thought so too. That was the closest I came to saying it out loud. Then he asked about Brennan and Sloane. What would happen to them now? I looked at the papers spread across my table, at the numbers that no longer needed explanation. I told him I wasn't ignoring it anymore. That was how it would be handled. We talked a little longer after that, about his classes, his dorm, normal things, because normal still mattered, even now. When I hung up, I didn't sit down. I gathered everything I needed and walked out the door again. This time, I wasn't just preparing anymore. I was taking action. I didn't slow down once I stepped outside that second time. By then, hesitation had no place left in my decisions. The drive back to the bank felt completely different now. Not uncertain, not heavy, but focused in a way that felt final. When I walked inside, the same quiet greeted me again, but this time I wasn't there to ask questions anymore. I was there to begin something that couldn't be undone. Harlan looked up the moment I entered his office again. There was surprise in his eyes, but not confusion. He knew why I had come back. I placed the envelope of cash on his desk without explanation. Then I set my account details beside it, steady and precise. I told him I needed to make a tuition payment immediately, directly to Westbridge University, no delays, no conditions. He nodded and reached for the paperwork without hesitation. As he began processing everything, I added something else. I told him I wanted to dispute every single transaction, not some of them, not the largest ones, all of them. He paused for a moment and looked at me carefully, as if making sure I understood what that would mean. I did. I told him to start the process immediately. The paperwork began moving quickly after that. Forms, signatures, confirmations, each step locking something into place. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt something steady inside me. Not relief, not yet, but direction. When I left the bank again, I didn't feel lost anymore. I felt clear. That clarity carried me through everything that followed. That same afternoon, I made another call. Not to Brennan, not to Sloane, not to anyone connected. I called someone who had no reason to protect them. A lawyer who would only look at facts. Her name was Celeste Marwin. Her office was simple, quiet, nothing unnecessary. The kind of place where words mattered more than appearances. She listened without interrupting while I explained everything. Every detail, every document, every decision. When she finished, she didn't react emotionally. She simply reached for the papers and began reviewing them, one page at a time, one detail at a time. Her silence said more than any reaction could have, because she wasn't guessing, she was confirming. After several minutes, she placed one document in front of me, a transfer labeled Emergency Structural Repairs. I told her I never had those repairs done. She nodded, then flipped to the next page. She showed me where the money actually went, to Sloane's business account. Another transfer led to Brennan's company. Another one paid for a travel agency I recognized immediately, a trip they had taken months earlier. Smiling photos, quiet messages, nothing that hinted at truth. I felt something settle in me again. Not shock anymore, just recognition. She looked at me and said exactly what it was: fraud. Not confusion, not mismanagement, not misunderstanding. Intentional, documented fraud. Hearing it spoken out loud didn't break me. It clarified everything completely. I told her I wanted to proceed, fully, completely, without hesitation. She warned me what that would bring: legal action, investigation, consequences that wouldn't stay private. People would choose sides, stories would change, but I had already crossed that point. I told her to file everything. She did. From that moment on, things moved faster than I expected. The detective came to my house 2 days later. She didn't arrive with drama or authority, just quiet focus and sharp attention to detail. We sat at my kitchen table again, the same place where everything had once felt safe. I gave her every document I had collected. She reviewed them carefully, asking questions that mattered. She confirmed what Celeste had already seen: financial exploitation, fraud, and forgery. She said they would begin a full investigation immediately. She also told me something important before leaving. She told me not to engage with Brennan directly anymore, to let the process handle everything from here. I agreed, because there was nothing left to say. But Brennan didn't stop trying to reach me. The calls came constantly for days, messages changing tone each time they appeared. Anger first, then urgency, then something softer, almost like regret, but not quite. I didn't respond to any of them, because silence had finally become my answer. A week later, everything became official. The bank confirmed unauthorized transactions. The investigation moved forward with formal charges. There was no more room for explanation, only consequences. Family reactions came quickly after that. Some people reached out asking me to calm down. They called it a misunderstanding, something private. But they hadn't seen what I had seen. They hadn't held those papers in their hands. They hadn't lived those 11 years. So I didn't argue with them. I didn't explain anything anymore, because truth doesn't need approval to exist. Miles called me every week after that, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He told me about classes, late nights, small victories, normal life moving forward exactly as it should. That mattered more than anything else. One afternoon, he sent me a photo, standing in front of an old stone building, backpack on his shoulder, looking steady and focused, Arthur's old keychain still hanging from the zipper. That image stayed with me longer than anything else, because it proved something important. They hadn't taken everything. They hadn't taken him. Months passed, and things settled into something quieter, not easier, but clearer in a way that stayed. Celeste finalized everything legally, the remaining funds secured properly this time, my accounts protected without shortcuts or trust misplaced. Even my will was rewritten, simple and exact. No confusion left for anyone to misuse again. Brennan sent one last message eventually. He asked if we could talk, just the two of us. I read it once and then set the phone down. Some doors don't close with noise or anger. They simply stop opening altogether. One afternoon, I went to an estate sale. I bought something completely unnecessary, an old brass samovar, heavy and detailed. I didn't need it for anything practical, but I liked it, and that was enough. I placed it in my kitchen where the jar once sat. Different object, same place, different meaning. That evening I made tea slowly and carefully, the same way I always had. But this time there was no weight behind it, no quiet sacrifice hidden inside the moment. Just tea, just time, just peace. For 11 years I had been careful with everything. Careful with money, careful with trust, careful with silence. But in the end, what mattered wasn't being careful, it was knowing when to stop something completely. If I had to say it simply, I would say this: they didn't just take money from me, they took time, trust, and something much deeper, but they didn't get to keep it. Because in the end, I chose not to stay silent, and that changed everything.